The Enchanted Island by Arthur Conan Doyle. It was no easy task to bring the Gamecock to shore. The river had deposited so much silt that the banks had pushed miles out into the sea. Whenever we drew near, the roar of the surf warned us of the danger. We had to proceed with 1,000 precautions, using only the mainsail and the foresail, keeping a watchful eye on the line of the breakers. Several times our keel scraped the bottom. The yacht drew less than 6 feet, but there was still enough room and a fair chance to move forward. At last, the depth began to increase rapidly. A boat was sent out from the fort to meet us and guide us closer to the island. About 200 meters from the shore, we were forced to drop anchor. A local man signaled to us with frantic gestures that it was impossible to come any closer. Once I was satisfied that we were riding securely at anchor, I decided to see to our water supply without delay. The surrounding landscape seemed to breathe fever. The vast river, the mud banks glistening in the sun, the deadly green of the jungle, and the heavy, humid air, all of it signaled danger to anyone who understood the signs. I sent a boat ashore with 2 water casks, which would have to last us until we reached St. Paul, Delaware, Loanda. As for myself, I took a small skiff and rowed toward the island. Above the palm fronds, I had spotted a fluttering British flag, marking the office of the trading house Hermitage and Wilson. Rounding a grove of trees, I saw the station itself, a long, whitewashed building with a wide veranda and a long row of palm oil barrels. A small fleet of barges and boats lay by the shore near a tiny jetty. Standing there were 2 men dressed in white, cinched with red sashes. One was a tall, stout man with graying beard. The other was long and thin, with a pale, sickly face half hidden under a wide, mushroom-shaped hat. "Glad to see you," the latter greeted me heartily. "My name is Walker, agent for Hermitage and Wilson. Allow me to introduce Dr. Severall of the same company. It is a rare pleasure to see a private yacht in these parts." "This is the Gamecock," I replied. "I am her owner and captain. My name is Meldrum." "Are you exploring?" he asked. "I am a lepidopterist, a butterfly hunter. I've worked my way down the west coast, starting from Senegal." "Any luck with the hunting?" the doctor asked, slowly turning his yellowish eyes toward me. During these introductions, we moored the boat. I walked toward the house, accompanied by my 2 companions, who peppered me with questions. It had been several months since they had seen another white man. "What do we do here?" the doctor remarked when I, in turn, began to question them. "We have work enough, and in our spare moments we talk politics." "Yes," added Walker. "By a special grace of Providence, Severall is a rank radical, while I am a staunch unionist. Consequently, we spend 2 solid hours every evening arguing over Home Rule. And sipping our quinine," the doctor added. "By now, we are thoroughly saturated with it, a necessity, considering the temperature reached 103 degrees here last year. As an impartial observer," he continued, "I would advise you to linger here, unless you collect bacteria as well as butterflies. The mouth of the Ogowai will never be known as a health resort." Nothing was more admirable than the cheerfulness with which these vanguard pioneers of civilization bore the various hardships of their lives. Everywhere, from Sierra Leone onward, I had encountered similar poisoned swamps, but rarely such men marooned in solitude and plagued by fever, possessing that same morbid wit. It always seemed to me a touch of the divine, this human capacity to rise above one's circumstances and make a jest of material misery. "Dinner will be ready in about half an hour," the doctor said. "Walker has gone to oversee it. It's his turn to manage the kitchen this week. We might take a stroll in the meantime, and I shall show you the island." The sun had already dipped behind the palm tops, and the celestial vault stretched above us like the interior of a vast seashell, shimmering with delicate crimson and pale azure. No one who hasn't lived in this land, where the heat makes even the weight of a napkin on one's knee feel unbearable, can imagine the blessed relief brought by the evening cool. Breathing in the fresh, reviving air, the doctor and I walked around the island. He showed me the storehouses and explained the workings of the station. "There is little romance in this region," he remarked, responding to my comments on the lack of gaiety in their lives. We live here as if on the frontier of the infinite. In that direction, he continued, pointing northwest, Paul du Chaillu ventured into the interior and discovered the home of the gorilla. That is the Gabon, the land of the great apes. And over there, he gestured toward the southwest, no one has yet traveled far. The territory washed by this river is entirely unknown to Europeans. Every piece of what the current brings down comes from a land still unexplored. I have often wished I were a better botanist when I see the singular orchids and strange plants cast up here on the bank. The spot the doctor pointed to was a cove of dark water. It was choked with floating vegetation, amidst which loomed a massive tree trunk, its dark bark licked by the ripples. All of this drifts in the interior and settles in the bay until the tide comes to sweep it out to sea. What sort of tree is that? I asked, pointing to the strange trunk. A species of teak, I believe, though by its appearance it is heavily riddled by shipworms. We have every kind of hardwood here, to say nothing of the palms. Shall we head back now? He led me into a long building filled with massive staves and hoops. This is our cooperage. The staves are sent to us in crates, and we assemble the barrels ourselves. Now, do you notice anything peculiar or mysterious about this building? I see nothing out of the ordinary, and yet something extraordinary is happening here. You see that bed? Well, I intend to spend the night there. I don't wish to boast, but I believe it is a place to test the strength of one's nerves. Why? Oh, because something unusual occurs here. You speak of the monotony of our lives, but I assure you, at times it is filled with far too much excitement. However, we had best go inside now. Once the sun sets, the malarial mist rises from the swamps. See, it is already drifting over the river. Indeed, long streaks of white vapor were stretching across the water. The air grew damp and cold. And there's the gong for dinner, the doctor added. If you are interested, I shall tell you everything afterward. The doctor's words intrigued me. In his entire bearing within that empty shed, there was a gravity and a certain restlessness that struck me. He was a strong, brave, masculine man, and yet in his eyes, when they rested on me, I noticed an expression I find difficult to describe. Something between fear and anxiety, like a man holding himself in readiness for something. By the way, I said as we headed home, you showed me the huts of your black laborers, but I haven't seen a soul. They sleep on a pontoon on the far bank. Really? Then why do they have the huts? Oh, they lived in them until recently. But we moved them to the pontoon to let them recover their wits. They were half mad with terror, so we were forced to let them go. No one stays on the island overnight now, except for Walker and myself. What was it that frightened them so? I asked. Your question leads directly to the story. I don't believe Walker will mind if I tell it to you. Besides, I see no reason to keep it secret, though it is, in truth, a most lamentable affair. Throughout the magnificent dinner prepared in my honor, he did not drop another word regarding the matter. We were served by a black steward from Sierra Leone. I was about to remark that, at the very least, this one had not fled with the others, when, having placed a dessert and wine upon the table, he raised a hand to his turban. Am I needed further, Mr. Walker? He asked. No, all is well, mussa, my host replied. But I am not feeling quite myself, and so I should like you to remain on the island tonight. A struggle between dread and duty played across the steward's face. His skin took on that bluish livid tint which serves as pallor in a dark complexion, and he began to glance about fearfully. No, no, Mr. Walker, he cried at last. You had better come with me to the pontoon. I can look after you much better there. That is impossible, mussa. White men do not abandon the posts where they have been stationed. I saw that internal conflict flare up again in the man's face, and once more he let out a cry of terror. No, no, Mr. Walker, he repeated. Forgive me. I cannot stay. If it were yesterday or tomorrow, but tonight is the third night. Master, I cannot bear it. Walker shrugged his shoulders. Have it your way, then. Go. But when the mail boat arrives, you shall return to Sierra Leone. I have no use for servants who desert me when I need them most. I imagine this all seems rather strange to you," he added, turning to me, "unless the doctor has already enlightened you." I showed Captain Meldrum the shed, but I haven't told him anything yet, Dr. Severall replied. "You look unwell, Walker," he added, watching his companion closely. "The fit is upon you." "Yes, I've been shaking all day, and my head feels like a cannonball. I've taken 10 grains of quinine, so my ears are ringing like a copper kettle, but I shall still spend the night in the shed." "No, no, my old friend. You shall go to bed at once, and Captain Meldrum will excuse you. I shall keep the watch in the shed myself, and I promise to bring you your medicine before breakfast." It was evident that Walker had been seized by a paroxysm of fever, the true scourge of these regions. A flush crept over his pale cheeks. His eyes burned with a feverish light. Sinking back into his seat, he began to sing in the high, shrill voice characteristic of the delirium. Go on. We'll get you to bed, old chap," the doctor said. With my assistance, he led the sick man to his bedroom. There we undressed him, and after he took a heavy sedative, he sank into a profound sleep. "That's him done for the night," the doctor remarked when we returned to our seats and refilled our glasses. "We take this duty in turns, but I should have been quite vexed that the fit had taken me tonight, for I must solve this mystery. I believe I told you I intend to keep watch in the shed. When I say keep watch, I don't mean sleep, for I have no intention of closing my eyes. We have such a panic here that not a single native will agree to stay on the island after sunset. It is imperative that I discover the cause of this fear tonight. It has always been our custom to keep a watchman in the Cooperage to prevent the theft of the hoops. 6 days ago, the man stationed there for the night vanished. We found not a single trace of him. The incident was truly extraordinary, as all the boats were accounted for, and no one would dare swim across the river, for it teems with crocodiles. What happened to that man? How he vanished from the island remains a total riddle to us. Walker and I were merely puzzled, but the laborers were terrified, and strange stories began to circulate among them. However, the real panic only began 3 days ago, when the new watchman, in his turn, vanished from the shed. What happened to him, then? I asked. Not only do we know nothing, but we cannot even conceive of an explanation, the doctor replied. The natives swear a demon lives in the shed, one that claims a man every 3 days. They refuse to stay on the island a moment longer and would listen to no reason. Even Musa, despite all his loyalty, preferred to abandon his sick master rather than spend the night here, as you saw for yourself. Therefore, if we are to keep this station running, we must first disabuse the men of their terror. I see no better way than to keep the watch myself. Tonight is the 3rd night, and I intend to be in that shed, come what may. Have you no clues at all? I inquired. No signs of a struggle, no footprints or bloodstains. Nothing to give us an idea of the danger you are courting? Absolutely nothing. The man vanished, that is all. The last watchman was old Ollie, who had been with the firm since its founding. He was as reliable as a rock. Only something extraordinary could have made him abandon his post. Very well, I said, but I do not believe this is the work of a single man. Your friend is drugged with medicine, and should the need arise, you would be without help. Allow me, therefore, to spend the night in the shed with you. That is noble of you, Meldrum, the doctor said, gripping my hand warmly. I should never have dared to suggest it, seeing as you are but a passing guest. But if you truly wish it, I do, certainly. Only let me return to the Gamecock for a moment to tell them not to expect me. As we returned from the embankment, the darkness of the night struck us. A massive blue-black cloud was rolling in from the coast. A hot, gusty wind lashed our faces like the heat from a furnace. The river surged and seethed, casting flecks of whitish foam onto the planks of the jetty. "1,000 devils!" cried Dr. Severall. "To crown our delights, we are going to have a flood. The rise in the river shows there has been heavy rain upstream, and there's no telling when it will stop. We've seen the whole island submerge once before. Let us go and see that Walker is comfortable, and then we shall head to our bivouac." The sick man lay in a heavy sleep. We placed a glass of water by his side in case he woke thirsty, and then set out through the supernatural gloom toward the shed. The river had risen so high that the little cove had visibly changed shape. The spits of land enclosing it were nearly under water. The gathered driftwood, with that great tree trunk in the center, heaved and tossed in the swirling current. "The flood will at least do us one favor," the doctor remarked. "The water will sweep away all that vegetation clogging the bay. But here's our camp, a few books and a box of tobacco. Let us try to make the best of the night." By the light of a small lantern, the shed looked profoundly dismal. Aside from the barrels and hoops, the only furniture was the doctor's mattress spread in the corner. We fashioned 2 chairs and a table out of staves and prepared for our vigil. Severall brought a revolver for me and armed himself with a double-barreled shotgun. We loaded our weapons and laid them within easy reach. The small circle of light and the vast vault of shadows were so melancholy that Severall returned to the office to fetch 2 candles. One wall of the shed was pierced with openings for windows, but as no glass was fitted, we had to build a shelter of boards to protect our candles from the wind. The doctor, who seemed to possess nerves of steel, took up a book, but I noticed he lowered it to his knees every few moments to peer around the room. For my part, after a couple of attempts at reading, I had to admit I was unable to concentrate. My thoughts wandered to the vast emptiness of the shed and into the sinister mystery surrounding it. My mind positively ached with the effort to find some theory for the disappearance of those 2 men. There was only one blunt fact. They were gone, and here we sat, in the very same spot, waiting, without the slightest idea what it was we were waiting for. I felt I was right to assume it was not the work of one man. In that light, the matter seemed somewhat more fathomable, but no power on earth would have kept me there had I been without a companion. What an endless and exhausting night. Outside, we heard the roar and gurgle of the river and the howling of the wind, which grew steadily stronger. Inside the shed, there was a heavy, profound silence, broken only by our own breathing, the light rustle of the doctor turning a page, and the occasional thin hum of a mosquito. Suddenly, my heart leaped in my chest. The book slipped from Severall's hands to the floor, and he sprang from his seat, his eyes fixed on one of the window openings. "Did you notice anything, Meldrum?" "No. Did you?" Yes, it seemed to me as if something slipped past a window." He snatched up his gun and stepped toward the opening. "No," he said. "There is nothing to be seen, and yet I could have sworn I saw something move slowly past the glassless frame." "Perhaps a palm frond," I suggested, "for the wind is rising more and more." "No doubt," he replied, taking up his book again, though he did not cease to cast short, suspicious glances toward the window. Suddenly a storm, as if breaking its chains, turned our thoughts in a new direction. A dazzling flash of lightning struck, followed by a peal of thunder that shook the entire structure. Continuous white flares of lightning ripped through the gloom, and terrible crashes resounded like the firing of enormous cannons. Then the tropical rain arrived, drumming and clattering against the iron roof. From the darkness outside, there now rose a chaotic medley of sounds, a world of seething, splashing, flowing, and dripping, a liquid madness over which the dull roar of the river presided. The din and the surge grew ever louder. Upon my word, we are facing a most formidable flood this time. But look, at last the blessed dawn. Whatever happens, we have finished with the superstitious terrors of the 3rd night. Dawn was indeed peering through the windows. The day was about to begin. The rain had ceased, but the brown river surged and roared like a cataract. I began to fear for the gamecock's anchors. "I must get to the yacht," I said. "If she is torn from her moorings, she'll never make it back into the river. The island protects her from the brunt of the current," the doctor replied. "If you like, let us go and have some coffee instead." I felt so weary and spent that I gladly accepted the kind invitation. We left the ill-famed shed, its mystery still unsolved, and trudged back toward the office. "Here is the spirit lamp," Severall said. "Light it, if you please, while I go and see how Walker is faring." He stepped out, but a moment later he returned, his face distorted with horror. "He is dead!" he cried in a hoarse voice. At these words, a shiver of terror ran through me. I stood frozen with the lamp in my hand, my eyes fixed on Severall. "Yes, he is dead. Look for yourself." I followed him without a word. At the threshold of the room, I was struck by the sight of Walker stretched out on the bed in the same gray flannel undergarments I had helped him into the previous evening. The doctor seemed violently shaken. His hands trembled like leaves in the wind. "He has been dead for several hours." "Surely not from the fever?" I asked. "From the fever? Look at his leg." Indeed, the leg was completely out of place, twisted in a ghastly, unnatural fashion. Great God, who could have done this? Severall pressed his head against the corpse's chest. "Feel here," he whispered. I placed my hand where he indicated and felt no resistance. The body was utterly soft, as if I were squeezing a rubber doll. "The bony structure of the chest is entirely gone," Severall remarked in that same stifled voice. "It has been crushed to splinters. Thank God, at least, that he must have died in his sleep. But what could have done this?" "There is something lurking here that I can neither understand nor endure," Severall replied, shaking his head. "I do not know if I am more of a coward than other men, but this is beyond my strength. If you are returning to your yacht, let us go," I said, and so we departed. If we did not outright run, it was only because each of us wished to maintain at least a shadow of composure before the other. It was reckless to set out in a light skiff upon such a turbulent river, but we gave it no thought. With great effort, we reached the yacht and found ourselves, at last, among men. "We shall go ashore again in 2 hours," I said. I would not for anything have the natives see me looking as I did a moment ago. I gave orders for breakfast to be prepared. Afterward we shall land. "In the name of God, Doctor, what do you make of it all?" "It surpasses my understanding. I have heard talk of witchcraft and evil spirits, and I laughed at it along with the rest. But poor Walker, that a 19th century man, a believer in God, an Englishman and a member of the Primrose League, should die such a death, without a single whole bone left in his body. It is incredible. But look, Meldrum, is that sailor of yours drunk, or has he lost his mind? What is the matter with him?" Old Peterson, the eldest of my crew, and usually as steady as a pyramid, had been stationed at the bow with a boat hook to fend off the drifting logs. At that moment his knees gave way, his eyes started from his head, and he pointed a shaking hand wildly at the current. "Look at it! Look there!" he shrieked. In that same instant we saw it too. A colossal tree trunk was racing down the river. The water licked its black, glistening surface, and ahead of it, by perhaps 3 feet, there rose a horrific head, curved like the prow of a ship, swaying slowly from side to side. It was as large as a beer barrel, bloated and terrifying, and of a sickly yellow hue. The neck was mottled with yellow and black spots. As it surged past us, I saw 2 enormous coils slip from a great hollow in the wood, and the hideous head suddenly reared 10 feet into the air, fixing its lidless, skin-covered eyes upon the yacht. A moment later, the tree shot past us like an arrow and vanished with its monstrous passenger toward the Atlantic Ocean. What in the name of heaven was that? I cried. "That," said Dr. Severall, "was the demon of our shed." In a single minute, he had transformed back into the brave, self-reliant man I had first met. "Yes, that is the demon that lived on our island. It is the great python of the Gabon." I recalled the various stories I had heard of this giant constrictor, of its periodic gluttony, and the terrible power of its deadly embrace. Then, all at once, it became clear. A week ago, when the floods rose, the current had brought that great hollow tree and its ghastly inhabitant to the island. Who knows from what remote tropical forest it had drifted? The log had settled in the cove, and the nearest building was the Cooperage. Twice, driven by hunger, it had taken the watchman. Last night, It had undoubtedly crept toward the shed at the very moment Severall thought he saw something pass the window, but the light of our candles must have turned aside. It crawled further on and crushed Walker in his sleep. But why did it leave him? I asked. The thunder and lightning must have terrified the brute. But here is the cook, Meldrum. The sooner we breakfast and the sooner we go ashore, the better. We would want the natives to think we were afraid.